The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everybody, this is Tina with MParks. We're going to go ahead and get started in just another minute or two. Just give people a few minutes to log in because I do know it takes some time to launch the GoToWebinar. So hold tight and we will get started in about 2 minutes. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tina Nowakowski, and I am the Communications and Marketing Manager at MParks. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. We're really excited to be able to offer this session after it was canceled at conference due to the snow, so we're really glad that you can join us today. We're really lucky that Marcy and Tamara were able to make some time to join us. I do want to let everybody know that you can hear us, but we cannot hear you, and we will be recording this webinar so that the membership can refer to it later. All of you that are in attendance will receive an email with the webinar recording link, as well as the PowerPoint slides. The PowerPoint slides are also can also be found in the handout section on your GoToWebinar control panel, so that you can follow along or print it out if you'd like. If you do have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to use the chat box. I'll be monitoring that so that Tamara and Marcy can do the presentation and not have to worry about that. So whether it's an AV question or a question about the presentation, that can go right into the chat box. If you have a question that comes up later, feel free to email info@mparks.org. With that, I'm going to introduce today's speakers and then turn it over to them to begin. So today's session, One Community, One Plan, will cover the DNR requirements for 5-year parks and recreation plans and how those requirements can be incorporated into a community master plan. Participants will be able to describe the process and content required to complete a 5-year park and recreation plan, outline the benefits of completing a community master plan, and recall funding sources for planning and implementation of projects. Our speakers today are Tamara Jorkasky and Marcy Hamilton. Tamara is a grant coordinator for the Michigan Natural Resource Trust Fund Program, Land and Water Conservation Fund Program, and the Michigan Recreation Passport Grant Program. She's the Grant Management Section Lead Resource for 5-year recreation plans. Tamara also serves on the DNR Accessibility Team and the Sense of Place Council. Marcy is the Deputy Executive Director and Senior Planner and has a developed track record of implementing successful projects for a variety of clients around the Southwest Michigan region. She has a wealth of experience writing master and recreation plans, facilitating planning processes, and developing grants and implementing projects in watershed planning, economic development, and recreation. With that, I think I'm going to hand it back over to Tamara. So Tamara, if you will just unmute yourself, then everyone can hear you. Tamara, you should be able to speak now.
All right, thank you, Tina. Thank you for the introduction and the opportunity to present in this format. So today we're going to go through, we just did the intro, so I'm going to skip through that, and you guys all have a copy of the presentation, so you can refer to that as well. I would say one more learning outcome that we could add to this is how you could incorporate the requirements of the 5-year plan into your master plan document. So the format is we're going to do an overview of the 5-year plan requirements, then talk about community master plans, and then funding that's available for planning. So why develop a 5-year plan? There's really 3 main reasons. One is to have an inventory of your existing parks and rec facilities, who does what, where does the funding source come from in terms of parks and recreation. The second would be to have a strategic plan of action, and the third is for grant eligibility. So the 5-year plan is a requirement for recreation grants that are administered through the DNR, including the Land and Water Conservation Fund and Michigan Natural Resources Trust Fund. It is also one eligibility requirement that can be used for recreation passport. And then a couple of years ago, it also became an eligibility requirement for the Waterways Grant Program. So who is eligible to do these 5-year plans and become eligible for these DNR recreation grants? So the state of Michigan actually does their own 5-year plan, which is called the SCORP for short, which stands for State Comprehensive Outdoor Recreation Plan. So that is the plan that makes the DNR eligible for federal land and water conservation funds. Native American tribes, local units of government, which can include cities, townships, village, recreation authorities, HCMA, trail authorities, also joint recreation plans. So that is a combination of these different units of government planning together and then each individually adopting the plan so that they're eligible to apply for grants each within their own community. And then school districts only if they are the sole provider of recreation for a community. So it'd be really important every time you're going to look to update your 5-year plan to go to the DNR website, and there's a link here in the PowerPoint to get there, and look at the 5-year plan guidelines. We tend to update them a little bit every year, tend to be clarifications, although if you have a copy from, say, like 2013 that you printed off, there's going to be a lot of significant changes since that version was printed. So I'd recommend to check for current additions. And our requirements are really just a minimum. You can always do more than what we ask for. So for example, as I've seen other people put in things like what are their ordinances that deal with parks and recreation, their non-motorized transportation plan, or a green infrastructure plan. Those would be some extra things that someone might decide to include. This is your community's plan. So some basic things that we ask for are community description, administrative structure, recreation inventory. Natural resource inventory is optional, but again, it would be recommended, especially if you're thinking about doing acquisitions. What planning process did you go through? Public input process. What are your goals and objectives? Your action plan, and then the plan approval documentation and transmittals. So who can write these plans? I've seen this really in a variety of ways, and our guidance documentation, we try to be really clear so that if somebody, if at a grassroots level really wanted to write the plan, or for people that maybe don't have as much experience, that they could work on it. So I've seen a combination of these things as well. I've seen sometimes where the local unit of government, maybe they have a park committee or park board, take on portions, and then they might hire a consultant to do other parts of it for them, maybe run their public input portions. Regional planning commissions and consultants are both great resources that would have experience in working on plans. Some planning commissions have discounted fees for members, so that might be a good option to look at as well. Interns are a really great resource. You have some people that are really motivated to get some great experience. They're going through their college programs, and it could be a really economical option as well. They could help you do things like inventory, data gathering, helping with workshops, things like that. I think one of the biggest thing is when you have these combinations of people working on things, coordination would be really important. I think that's one of the kind of a pitfall that I've seen is you'll have a group of people working on developing the plan, and then when it gets to the adoption part, things could kind of fall apart. So making sure coordination happens really early on and everybody understands the steps. So with the community description, you're going to be talking about what community does this plan cover. But we also want to see how does that community fit within the regional context. So kind of zoom out, what county is this, what township is this, and then zoom in to who is this plan specifically about. So who will adopt that plan? What is the local unit of government, school district, or if a joint recreation plan, explain that as well. So the administrative structure is, how does the township government, city government, how does it function? Who has the authority to make parks and recreation decisions? Have an organizational chart to show that flow. Budget and funding. So I've seen this in a variety of formats as well. If you want to include spreadsheets or a text description, either way is fine. We just want to see what is your funding source. Is it general fund? Do you have a millage? Is it an as-needed basis? Give us an idea of how that's budgeted out and where the sources come from. Tell us about any relationships or partnerships or volunteer commitments that you have in your parks, like Friends of the Parks, things like that, just to give us an understanding and to document it for your own use. With recreation authorities or trailway commissions, we want to see the articles of incorporation that show the enabling legislation that allows this entity to be operated the way it is. And we also want to see that it addresses recreation grant encumbrances. And then once you get a grant and say the authority dissolves, what happens to that property that has become encumbered under our grant agreement? Many of our programs are perpetuity. So once you have a grant that encumbers a site, that is supposed to be open to the public for outdoor public recreation use forever. So something important to have set up. And we'd ask that you contact us early and let us take a look at it. We can provide some guidance and make sure you're on the right track. You'll include a recreation inventory, so let us know how you collected that information. Sometimes if you're doing the post-completion self-inspection reports, if you've had past grants, you're already out at the park doing that inventory. You can just do it all at the same time. Again, this would be another good opportunity for interns to work on this kind of stuff too. So you're going to have an inventory of all your parks and recreation facilities and a location map. So you can do a nice little chart. I have an example here that shows the park name and the acreage, what facilities are each park. So it's kind of a quick and easy reference, but you'll also need a text description because there's some things that you'll go into further detail on. The park map should be clear, legible. I've seen these in a variety of formats too. I know everybody's sophistication level might be different. So if you have even like a Google map where you've identified things, it can be in a variety of formats. We also require an ADA assessment, so an assessment to the 2010 Americans with Disability Act standards. And you're looking at the facility and giving it at a minimum like a 1 to 5 ranking. So the 1 would be nothing is accessible, 2 would be some, 3 would be most, 4 would be all, and 5 would be going above and beyond ADA to more of a universally accessible facility. So we don't want to just know we give it a 1 or a 3. We want to know why that ranking was given. And this is really so that when you're planning your actions for the next 5 years, you can say, okay, this park got a 3 because I need to add an access route from the parking lot to the pavilion. So it gives you an idea of how to plan for those upgrades. And there are some different checklists available. I can send an email after the presentation to one checklist that I did find that was kind of a handy tool that you could use. If your community has already done an ADA transition plan, you could just include the sections of that plan that deal with your parks and rec facilities. That's also an option. So in 2016, we started working with the DNR Waterways program, and they wanted to use the 5-year plan as an eligibility requirement for their grant programs as well. So we have some inventory items that they request. This is only applicable to communities that have harbors and marinas. So if you have like a kayak launch or a boat launch, these items that are listed here, like talking about marketing and maintenance for dredging, things like that, you don't have to include, but you should include them as part of your inventory that you do have those types of facilities. We want a status report of completed grants. So if you've received a trust fund grant in the past, let us know the status of, say you had a playground that was funded. You know, is it still usable? Have you made maintenance repairs, things like that? And then post-completion self-inspection reports. So these are reports on grant-assisted sites. So we ask that when you submit your 5-year plan, we get these updated reports. So we get them every 5 years. And this is telling us things like how you maintain the site. Do you have your program recognition plaque up in place? If you have a facility that's, say it was funded 40 years ago and it was a playground and it's just not there anymore, it wasn't safe, it's had its useful life, let us know. We consider that an obsolete element. So it's okay to tell us those things. We want to know that. And then you'd also have a picture of your program recognition plaque. The natural resource inventory, like I said, is optional. These are things that you would include that show like conservation value. It's really good for potential acquisition. So if you see a critical spot that has like wetlands or really unique natural features that you want to preserve, is a good way to identify those. Or if you just want to include relevant sections of existing plans, like if you have a green infrastructure plan or a greenways plan, you can include, say, a map from those. You'd like to see a description of your planning process. So I would say a good rule of thumb would be 6 months is probably the least amount of time you want to give yourself to the planning process of doing a 5-year plan. A year is probably more reasonable. So you want to document that process. Did you do a review of existing plans? Did you talk to neighboring communities? Things like that. So again, the 5-year plan guidelines are minimum. You can always do more to plan for your 5-year recreation plan. So again, minimums, you're required to have at least 2 means of public input during the 5-year plan process. One must happen before the public hearing, and then the second is the actual public hearing. So the public input that occurs before the plan is drafted or while you're working on it, I really recommend doing a less formal setting. So having a public hearing in like a township board meeting where there's like a board sitting at a table and then a room, sometimes it doesn't feel as conducive to people speaking freely, or maybe you hear more from like one person and you don't get to hear from as many people. So doing a format like a workshop where you have tables set up and you can move around, or doing interviews. Surveys, they can be formal or informal. So like a formal survey, you could have like a telephone or a mail survey, or a more informal like a survey monkey. A charrette is another more intensive process. So it's like a 2 or 3 day planning process. I think the one big benefit out of that is you get a lot of the community input and buy-in early on, so that when you actually come to doing a project, like people are already on board. So those are the first means of public input when you're drafting the plan. And then that draft plan becomes available for review, and it needs to be noticed to the public that that plan is available for 30 days. And then you have a public hearing. So the public hearing needs to be advertised, and it can happen in a variety of formats. So if you want to have it at a park committee or board level, you can do that. Or if your highest governing body wants to hold that public hearing. If you're doing a joint plan, so again, this is when you have multiple units of government working on that plan together, you can consolidate the public hearing. So say you have 3 communities and you want to have one public hearing, you can do that, but it needs to be so that everyone in the community can get to it. If you had something where somebody had to travel 10 miles or something like that, that's not very conducive to having lots of public input. And we'd ask that you contact your grant coordinator when you're thinking about doing a joint plan, just so we can kind of talk through some of that formatting. So with the public input process, like I said, you're required to do different notifications. So we would want to see if you can do a newspaper advertisement, you can put something on your website, or you could post it on, like if you have a township bulletin board, you can do that, but we need to see basically the posting date and have it certified by the publisher. So if it was a newspaper advertisement, we'd want to see the affidavit of publication. If it was something that was on your website, if you do a screenshot that shows that date, you can do that. If you post something on the bulletin board, we'd want to have it signed by the clerk and dated, so we can see that was the date it was posted. And so the 30-day notice can be a little less formal. You can also do like Facebook posts, social media, but I would think of doing it in ways that the public would typically look for public notice so that it's widely available. And using multiple formats would be good too. For the public hearing and making these notifications, you need to meet the Open Meetings Act. So that only requires 18-hour notice at a minimum, which really, what you're trying to do is get public input and as much input as possible. So I would say if you can do a week to 2 weeks, that's really better notification. Another portion that you would have would be the goals and objectives. And these are generally more general and broad overarching concepts. And they would be based on input, need, and recreation standards. So you're asking people, what do you want? Your data you're gathering is telling you what people want. So that's your need and the input you're getting. With the recreation standards, these are just some recommendations. They're not required, because if, say, the recommendation is you have a certain number of handball courts or something like that, and nobody in your community plays handball, like why would you put it out there? So these are just some quick examples here. So the goal could be very broad, to provide recreation facilities to meet the needs of the community. So very broad. And then the objective could be to construct additional soccer fields. So kind of the nice thing about writing these somewhat broad is when you apply for a grant, if we relied solely on what you put in your action plan, well, things could change slightly. Maybe you wanted to do one thing at one time, but a new opportunity came up. But it still really does meet the goals and objectives that were outlined in that 5-year plan. If we didn't have it that way, you'd have to amend your plan frequently. So as long as it's meeting your general goals and objectives, it can be considered eligible for a grant application. So again, your action plan is more specific, goes to what kinds of projects you want to do to accomplish those goals and objectives. Typically, it's for 5 years. You can project further into the future if you want. And again, we look typically for our grants, so we were talking about construction or acquisition, but you can include additional things. This is your plan. If you want to talk about organizational things like staffing, you can do that, or programs that you offer. So here was an example of an action item. So construct 2 soccer fields at Memorial Park. So getting more specific. You can include a capital improvement schedule. It's not required, but that's another good planning tool. So in that sense, you would think of a specific year that you want to do a project, how much it costs, and what your funding sources would be. So after you go through that whole planning process, you need to have a local plan approval. So like we said, you have the 30-day plan review, you advertise the public hearing, and then we need to see the meeting minutes from that public hearing. The public hearing must occur before it is adopted by the highest governing body. So if you want to have your public hearing at the same meeting that it's adopted, you can do that. It just needs, the public hearing needs to happen before the adoption. So they need to be separate agenda items. And then with the joint recreation plan, like we said, you could have one combined public hearing, but each local unit of government will be adopting the plan individually. So we'll want to see the meeting minutes from those and the notices. So they should be final approved meeting minutes. And so typically, like, approved meeting minutes would be signed by the clerk. The 5-year plans can be submitted at any time of the year, but if you intend to apply for the recreation grants, it's due by February 1st of the year you intend to apply for grants. And several years ago, we switched to an online system called MyRecGrants. And that is how we accept 5-year plans. That is how grant applications are submitted, grant implementation. So everything occurs in this MyRecGrants system now. So if you don't have an account, you'll want to register for that. So each community uploads that plan in MyRecGrants and submits it. They'll upload that 5-year plan document. There's a checklist that you do that helps identify that you've reached and completed all of the items that were required. All of the notifications that we've talked about, approved meeting minutes for your public hearing and adoption, post-completion self-inspection reports, and then we ask that you do a transmittal to the county and regional planning commissions. So however you do that, if it's an email, letter, however you send it, just give us a copy of that so we can see that it was sent. With the joint recreation plans, each community is going to be submitting documents. You can have just one community upload the entire 5-year plan and then the others upload just the documents that pertain to them. But I think I would recommend each of you uploading the 5-year plan, because then it's in your portal. You've got that document stored in MyRecGrants. This is what the MyRecGrants screen looks like. I'm not really going to go through step by step how to upload it and save it, but all of these steps are outlined in the 5-year plan guidance on our website. So typical time frame, like I said, 6 months to a year is probably about the time frame that you're going to be developing this plan. So gathering inventory, reviewing documents, having public input, putting a draft out for review, all of that. So we'll just say you start working on it in 2019. So by February 1st of 2020, you would submit that in MyRecGrants. And if it meets all of the requirements, everything's in place, we would approve that so you could be eligible to apply for grants for the April 1st, 2020 application deadline. So the way we count 5 years will seem a little strange at first until I explain how we count it. So it's basically 5 grant cycles. So if you submitted it in February 1st, 2020, we would count that as 1 year. So it'd go 2020, 2021, 22, 23, 24. So your 5-year plan expires December 31st of 2024. So it's good for 5 grant cycles. And we don't approve them for longer than 5 years. So something might happen where you need to amend the plan. A lot of the things that I see where people need to do an amendment, maybe they did have a harbor or a marina and they didn't include those items in their 5-year plan and they want to apply for waterways. They do an amendment to add that to their 5-year plan. Or maybe they had acquired some new property and they want to develop it, but it's not part of the 5-year plan. Or some of the goals and objectives of the communities have changed. So they go through that amendment process. It does not extend the expiration date of the plan. You are just amending the plan that was already approved. So the process is a little bit quicker. So after you gather some public input, there's only a 2-week draft review period prior to the public hearing. And then you go through that approval process, same as you did the first time around. Where it would be different is if you have a joint plan. So if that amendment is only affecting one of the communities, then only that community needs to go through the amendment process, but they need to share that change with all of the other communities. And then the submittal is uploaded in My Rec Grants. If you have an amendment, you need to contact your grant coordinator first because we need to make some changes in the system to allow you to upload that amendment. There is an amendment checklist. We only want the pages of the plan that were changed, and you'll have a description of the planning process, all of the notices, approved certified meeting minutes. Again, you're transmitting to the County and Regional Planning Commission, and it's due by February 1st of the application year if you're applying for grants. And I'm going to look and see if there's any questions so far just on the 5-year plan portion. I don't see anything yet in the chat box.
No, I haven't seen anything come through.
Okay. And we'll have time at the end too if people think of things as we go along. So with that, I will let Marcy go through and talk about the community master plan.
Marcy.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. All right. So as Tamara was talking about the DNR's required plan for the grants, one thing that a community might want to think about is instead of having a separate recreation plan, it can become part of your overall community master plan. And so I'm just going to go through some of the basics of a community master plan and just kind of highlight some of the areas where the 5-year recreation plan would fit in, or how it would integrate with a community master plan for your municipality. So I'm just going to go over why do a plan, what's in a plan, who's involved in the planning process, how you do it, how long it takes, and who can help. Gotcha. Okay. So first of all, why plan? Michigan had passed the Planning Enabling Act that lays out what the purpose of a community master plan is and why you should do it. And basically, it's a way for a community to express their land use policies, which is their philosophy on how you want your community to grow or how you want your community to be in terms of its character. It becomes really a tool for decision makers in your community to balance private property rights with the public interest. And the biggest thing of why you want to have a community master plan is it's the basis for all your zoning decisions in your community and the basis for your zoning ordinance itself. And without that master plan, community master plan as a basis for that, you really open your community up for some liability issues. But basically, the zoning is there, so you're trying to make fair decisions in your community, and you're treating everybody in the same way, fairly and consistently. So another reason why you want to plan is so you have growth and development that's coordinated in your community and that's efficient and makes sense for your community. You want to make sure that you're promoting growth that maintains the character that you want to see in your community. And you want to make sure you're promoting public health and safety and things like that for your community. The other thing that's really important, and this is where some of the recreational aspects I have highlighted or in bold here. In your plan, you want to make sure you're providing your community with a transportation system that's safe and efficient, not only for cars, but also for bicycles and pedestrians. So that could be for people that are commuting, but also could be for recreational uses too. And it specifically in the planning legislation, it does list adequate provision for recreation is part of your, should be part of your community master plan. So it makes sense to incorporate those elements into your plan. Usually a master plan, like the recreation plan, as Tamara was saying, is good for 5 years, then you have to do a new one. Usually community master plans are for 20 years or more. That's the length of time you're looking at when you're doing your planning, kind of the planning horizon. A lot of the contents of the plan are the same, you'll notice, as the recreation plan contents, community description, which has kind of your inventories that could include your recreation inventory, along with other inventories that you may do for your community. Also has information on demographics and existing conditions in your community. Goals and objectives. So, you know, as Tamara explained in her presentation, you have those overarching goals and then some more specific objectives. So you could have ones that relate to land use and infrastructure in your community, then also recreation goals and objectives that are specifically focused on that topic. Again, you want to talk about you can go back one, Tamara. So you want to talk about the Planning Commission's policies and recommendations for development. Again, how do you want your community to grow? How fast? You want things in there that talk about that. Also, the biggest part of your plan is a future land use map that allocates land for different uses. And again, one of those uses that you'd want on that future land use map is recreation and open space. So you could show where your parklands are or where you want future parklands to be in your community, along with where you want residents and commercial activities, industrial activities, and if you're a rural community, maybe where the agriculture is. So you'd allocate those uses on the land use map. Okay, go ahead. The other thing that usually is addressed in a master plan is your transportation systems. Again, this is where it overlaps with some of the recreational things with bicycle facilities and pedestrian ways. So you're not just talking about how cars get around in your community. If you have the waterways and waterfront developments, those should be in your plan too, again, so that addresses, you know, the new requirement that Tamara was saying for waterfront and marinas to be part of plans now. This would also be in your master plan. Also, if you have public sanitary sewer water supply systems, you want to address that type of infrastructure in your plan, utilities, and the last thing in your plan would be how are we going to implement this, kind of your action plan. So, like I said, the contents are pretty similar to the recreation plans. Obviously, they would just be more inclusive of different topics in your community. And then who does the planning? Usually for a master plan, it's usually led by the Planning Commission. And sometimes communities appoint a special committee that kind of works. It's kind of a working committee, but really the Planning Commission is responsible for the community's master plan. The Planning Commission is usually established by an ordinance of your community. It usually has 5 to 11 members that are appointed by either the township board, village council, or city council. And they usually serve 1 to 3 year terms. Most planning commissions, they try to get, you know, different segments of your community to be represented Again, if you are including your recreation plan and your master plan, it'd be important to have people that represent recreation or natural resources or the conservation districts, those types of folks on your planning commission, because that kind of input and representation. Obviously, the municipal board or council needs to be involved in the process because they're the ones who are ultimately going to be implementing a lot of the plan that's adopted in your community. Same thing with the recreation plan. For master plan, you need community input through the same methods that Tamara talked about: surveys, interviews, workshops, visioning sessions, those types of things. And again, you really want to make sure you're coordinating with the municipalities that surround you, the county and the region, to make sure that you're doing things that are coordinated with those bigger efforts that they may have going on. Process, one thing that's a little bit different in the process that's required for a master plan is you need to send out a notice before you start planning to all of the adjacent municipalities and to the county and the regional planning agency. And then if you have any utilities, companies, and those types of things, you have to send a notice to them saying you're starting the planning process. Then it's kind of a lot of the same stuff that you would again do in the recreation plan, obviously, with these other topics included. You identify what your community issues are, you collect all the information and data, you develop that community vision, what you want your community to be like in the future. You set your goals and objectives on how to achieve that vision. And then there is an adoption process that's a little more rigorous than the 5-year plan, recreation plan adoption process. And then after the plan is adopted, it's reviewed at least every 5 years and updated if necessary. So go ahead. Timeline, similar to the 5-year recreation plan. Usually the minimum it usually takes to do a community master plan is a year, just because you are addressing so many different topics, and you want to make sure you have time to gather that community input and do a good job of getting people involved in the planning process. Like I said, the adoption process is a little bit more rigorous for the community master plan. It can take about 3 months just to get through the comment period. After the planning commission is happy with the draft plan, they send it to the municipal board or council for their review and comment. And if they're happy with it, then they approve it for what's called distribution. And the plan is distributed to all those folks that you sent your notice to at the beginning of the process. And there's a 63-day period that folks have to comment back to you on the plan. Also, same as the recreation plan, you are required to hold at least one public hearing. And with this one, there is a requirement to have a 15-day notice. If you remember from what Tamara was saying, it's a little bit less lenient on the public hearing notice for the recreation plan, but in the plan legislation, you are required to have at least 15 days notice for your public hearing for your master plan. Then after that comment period is over and the public hearing is done, then it takes about another 2 months because the planning commission will incorporate any comments or make any changes that are needed, and then they'll go and adopt they're the body that usually adopts the plan. Of course, if you're going to have the recreation plan be part of your community master plan, then you need to have your highest governing body, the township board, village council, city council, adopt that plan, because that's the requirement from DNR on the recreation plan. But if it's just your master plan, that's not required. However, some communities do pass a resolution saying that the township board or village council or city council has the right to adopt the plan, and in that case, after the planning commission adopts it, then the municipal board will adopt it. Like I mentioned, every 5 years, the legislation says you should review the plan and determine if it needs to be updated or not. So that's a little bit different than the recreation plan where it's, it's only good for 5 years. And then something that communities really should do is every year develop a capital improvements program for public structures and improvements. And of course, that would definitely include any recreation capital improvements that you're planning in your community to. So it's an overall program to have laid out for your communities and move forward. And that's how you really implement these plans. So that's just a basic overview of the planning process and what's in the plan. There's a lot of resources out there. I've just listed probably the most used ones. MSU Extension, they have a great program called Citizen Planner. A lot of planning commission members and just people who are interested in local government take this class. It's a 6-week class, 1 night a week for 6 weeks, and goes through all kinds of local government functions, but it has a specific focus on what is a master plan and how do you do one and how do you implement one. And there's also, I think, an online option to take that class too if you can't get to a location for the 1 night a week. And the other resources I list there, I'll have websites with lots of resources on them. So if you are interested, you could click on those links in the presentation and it will take you right to the pages that have the resources that are about planning and zoning. So. And then the last one is the Michigan Association of Regions. I work for the Southwest Michigan Planning Commission, so we cover 3 counties in Southwest Michigan. There's 13 other regions in Michigan that are there and can be a great resource for a lot of times for mapping or census data or understanding how your community would coordinate with what's going on in the region or in the county that you're in. So they're a great resource if you're doing a recreation plan or a master plan. I would encourage you to reach out to your region and see what resources they may have for you.
Okay, I didn't see any questions about the master plan, but if people think of things, again, just add it to the chat box. So we've told you about all of these great planning documents and how they make you eligible for grant programs. And then you think, well, how am I going to pay for planning? There's grants for implementation, but what about for the planning side of things? So there are a few grant sources that Marcy and I could think of. There may be others, but these are just a couple of them. So the Coastal Zone Management Program, that's through the Office of the Great Lakes and the Michigan Department of Environmental Quality is one. Michigan Economic Development Commission, there's the Redevelopment Ready Communities, and then there are also local community foundations. So with the Coastal Zone Management Program, if you go to the website for that program, there's a map that can show you whether you fall within one of these coastal communities. So again, this would be for communities that are around the Great Lakes. So the CZM has program focus areas with planning funds. So there's coastal water dependent uses and community development and coastal hazards management. So if your 5-year plan or your master plan includes these kind of elements in it, there's $10,000 to $75,000 planning grants that can be used. Their deadline is in December, and again, I would go to the website. I'm not the content expert on this, but I would get a hold of them if this impacts your community. And I'm going to skip through the next slide or two that go into detail on those programs, but you have a copy of the presentation if you want to look at more. Now, the Redevelopment Ready Communities, this is the program that runs through MEDC. It's for eligibility would be communities with traditional downtowns. They've recently started allowing some townships if they have like a commercial core. So I think Meridian Township is one example if you're familiar with that community in Ingham County. So again, with this one, there is funding available, one-to-one lifetime maximum up to $20,000. So this funding could be used for master plan updates. So again, if you include the components for the 5-year recreation plan within the master plan, there's funding to use through the RRC program. And again, I would contact the community assistance team for your area. And then there's also community foundations. So each community has different focuses within their community foundation. So there's a website here for the Council of Michigan Foundations for the entire state of Michigan, and then you can pick by county. So for example, I've seen 5-year plans that took a big focus on health, and they've received funding through their local hospitals. So there could be grants if you're relating being out in the outdoors and parks and recreation and healthy, active living, and maybe you're going to have farmers markets in your pavilions and your parks on Saturdays. So, you know, incorporating those kinds of things, there might be some other funding sources. And I'm going to look at the chat box again to see if there's any questions listed in there.
I still don't see any questions, but if anybody thinks of anything, you see the contact information on the screen. You can either email there or email info@mparks.org, and we'll make sure that we get answers to your questions. So we can wait another minute, but I don't see anything coming through.
Okay.
I do want to thank you both for joining us. This was a great presentation, and we're really grateful to have you. Like I said, the recording of this webinar will be sent out tomorrow. You'll receive a link to that, and I'll also reattach the PowerPoint slides. So if anybody has any questions, doesn't look like it, I think we can go ahead and end the session unless you two wanted to add anything.
Nope, I'm good, thanks.
I'm all set. Thanks again.
All right, thank you. Have a great day.
You too.